On the 18th of August, 2022, a line of grain trucks, 11 deep, sat idling outside the elevator at Buffalo, South Dakota. And not one man in that line was talking. They were waiting on a number. A machine in the scale house was reading the protein out of every load that crossed the pit. And all morning it had read the same tired story.
We can't just sit here and let
2
them take
years
it.
earlier, at a
We have
co-op
to
meeting,
fight
a
back.
man named Wayne Tolliver had said, in front of 11 producers who all heard it clearly, "That isn't fertilizer, Dell. That's garbage with a pedigree, and you just spread it on the only ground your grandfather ever broke." That autumn, down every gravel road in Harding County, there were burn barrels going after dark, and what was burning in them was wool. Then, on the 12th of April, 2022, the telephone rang in the Brubaker kitchen, and the voice on the other end said, there would be no nitrogen allocated to his acres that spring. Not late, not rationed, none, at any price. His operating note came due the 1st of November. 400 acres, one growing season. No fertilizer. What does a man do with the one thing everybody else is paying to get rid of? But to understand how Del Brubaker came to be sitting in that truck line at Buffalo, we have to go back to the fall of 2020. Let me tell you first about the rule. Because in that country, the rules are not written down anywhere, and they are obeyed more carefully for it. Harding County sits in the far northwest corner of South Dakota, up against Montana on one side and North Dakota on the other. High, dry, wind-scoured country, 15 inches of moisture in a generous year, grass and sheep and a little dryland wheat. A mistake in that county does not cost you a season. It costs you the place, and the rule was this. Fertility comes out of a tank. It comes from town in the spring, with a soil test and a spreader truck and an invoice at a rate somebody with a degree calculated for you. Everything else, the manure pile, the old-timer's ash, the neighbor with a theory, is what a man does when he is out of options. The second rule concerned wool. Wool was a crop. You sheared in April, hauled it to the warehouse, and took what the buyer offered. If he offered nothing, you stored it a year and hoped. If he still offered nothing, you burned it, because a wool sack takes up room, and room in that country is worth more than sentiment. Nobody put wool on the ground. Not anywhere, not in living memory. Wool was fiber, and fiber does not feed a wheat crop. Every man in that county would have told you so, and every one of them would have been telling you what he honestly believed. Odell Brubaker. Dell, to anyone who had known him longer than 5 minutes, was 41 in the fall of 2020, and he was the third Brubaker to run that outfit. His grandfather, Emil, had broken out the North 40 in 1948 with a borrowed tractor and a moldboard plow, and put wheat in it every year after that, until his hands quit working. Dell had that same 40 and about 360 more, and he ran 600 ewes over the top of all of it. Here is the part that matters. Somewhere in the 1990s, the money in sheep moved out of the fleece and into the lamb. So Dell's father did what nearly every sheepman in the West did. He bred toward meat. And with each generation of that decision, the wool off those ewes got coarser, shorter, further from anything a mill wanted. For 20 years it did not matter, because coarse wool still sold into carpet, and felt, and insulation. It was never worth much. It was worth something. Then came 2020. The wool trade is a global trade, and that spring the world's mills stopped. Fine wool got hurt. Coarse wool got erased. Dell sheared 600 head in April and put up 14,200 pounds of wool. And when the buyers came through that summer, not one of them made a bid. Not a low bid. No bid. He had paid a shearing crew $4,400 to take it off. The wool was worth less than the crew that removed it. It sat in the warehouse at Belforche, and the woman who ran that floor was named June Acre. June was 44 and had been in wool since she was 19. That fall, she made calls she was not required to make, to producers whose wool she was storing for free and told them all the same thing in the same steady voice. Hold it. Do not burn it. I have room. Most of them burned it anyway. She called Del Brubaker 3 times. Now let me tell you about Wayne Tolliver. Because if you take nothing else from this story, take this. The man who tells you that you are wrong is very often the man with the best reasons in the room. Wayne Tolliver was 61 and had been agronomy manager at the county co-op for 31 years. He carried 240 customer accounts in his head, and he had put 4 children through school on a salary that came out of being right more often than he was wrong. He was not a proud man, and he was not a cruel one. But in 1997, he had watched a careful customer buy into a soil amendment sold as a replacement for commercial nitrogen, and he had said nothing because it was not his business. That man sold out in the 3rd year. Wayne never said nothing again, so in October of 2020, when word got around that Del Brubaker had hauled 14,000 pounds of unsold wool out of the Belfourche warehouse, run it through a manure spreader with the beaters slowed down, and worked it into the top 4 inches of the North 40, Wayne Tolliver said something. He said it at the fall producer meeting, 11 men in the room and the coffee going cold. And this is the part people get wrong when they tell the story afterward. What he said was correct. Wool is keratin, he said. Keratin is a protein locked up with sulfur bonds, and those bonds are what make it wool instead of hay. It does not break down on your schedule. It breaks down on its own, over years, at a rate nobody can predict. A wheat crop takes up its nitrogen in about a 6-week window. You cannot bank a crop on a release curve you can't measure. Then he said the other thing. That isn't fertilizer. Del, that's garbage with a pedigree, and you just spread it on the only ground your grandfather ever broke. Del Brubaker said one sentence back. He said, "It was going to burn, Wayne. I'd rather it rotted." And he went home. And the men in that room agreed, privately and almost kindly, that a man who has had a hard year sometimes does a thing that is more about the year than about the ground. Here is where the counter starts, running. In the spring of 2021, the North 40 came up in wheat that looked ordinary. Wayne Tolliver drove past it twice and did not stop, and that was, in its way, a kindness. But Del had walked that ground in March with a spade and found something he did not tell anybody about for a year. Under the residue, the soil came up darker and damp, and where he pulled out a piece of wool gone gray and half-rotted, the roots were running straight through it. So in the fall of 2021, he did an unreasonable thing. He sheared again, took another 13,000 pounds nobody wanted, then drove to 11 neighbors who were burning theirs and asked if he could have it. Everyone said yes. Some of them laughed. One helped him load. 56,000 pounds of other men's garbage came off that county in 3 weeks. And by the end of November, Del Brubaker had worked roughly 69,000 pounds of wool into 100, and 60 acres of dryland wheat ground. That left 240 acres with nothing on them at all, and then the world turned over. Nitrogen prices had been climbing through 2021, natural gas, plant outages, freight. Then, in late February of 2022, the largest fertilizer exporter on Earth went to war. Urea a man had bought at $350 a ton in 2020 was quoted north of $1,000. And the co-ops did not have product at any price, so they allocated on purchase history and took care of the accounts that had bought steady. On the 12th of April, 2022, the telephone rang in the Brubaker kitchen. Del had cut his commercial nitrogen purchase by more than half in 2021, because he had been putting wool on that ground instead, and the allocation formula did not care why. There was nothing for his acres that spring. He got out a pencil. Spot market fertilizer out of Rapid City would cover about 90 acres. So, 160 acres with wool on them. 90 he could feed. 150 going in bare. His operating note at the bank in Belforche came due the 1st of November. $61,400, secured by the whole outfit. And the outfit included Emile Brubaker's North 40. Dell called June Acri that night and told her the number, which was not a thing he had ever done with anybody. She listened without a word. Then she said, "You didn't burn it. Whatever else happens, you're the only one who didn't burn it." The rain quit on the 3rd of June. That is not a figure of speech. Everyone in that county can tell you the date, because everyone in that county watched the same storm do the same thing. It came up out of the southwest in the late afternoon, black-bottomed and dragging, the kind that makes men walk out of the shop and stand in the yard. It reached the county line and it split. Half went north over the slim buttes. Half went south toward Bison. And the middle of Harding County got 1/4 of an inch, and the smell of rain on hot gravel, which is the cruelest smell there is. 61 days followed with no measurable precipitation. 9 of them broke 100 degrees. By the middle of July, you could stand on any rise and see it. Wheat that went in bare was 3 inches tall and already turning. Wheat fertilized the normal way was taller, greener, and firing from the bottom up. A plant fed nitrogen and then denied water is a plant asked to run a race with no legs. The nitrogen was there. The moisture to move it was not. 240 acres of dell. Brubaker's ground went the same way as everybody else's, and then there was the 160. He put the combine in the wool, ground on the 16th of August, and ran the first round without looking, because he had decided on the drive out that he would not look until he had a full pass behind him. At the end of that round, he stopped and climbed down and stood at the back of the machine in the dust, and he looked in the tank. It was full. The wool ground made 31 bushels to the acre. The county average that year, on dryland spring wheat, came in a shade over 14, but the yield was not the number that mattered. On the 18th of August, he hauled to Buffalo and waited on the protein test like everybody else. Load after load was crossing at 13 and change. And in a year like that, 1/10 of a point was real money. And every man in the line knew what every other man's ticket said before it printed. Dell's first load tested 15.2. 3DT, man in the scale house ran it again, because that is what you do. It came back the same. He walked out with the ticket and did not hand it over right away. He looked at it. Then he looked out at the trucks. Then he handed it over and said, "What did you put on this?" And Dell Brubaker said, "Wool." 7,200 and some bushels came off that 160 acres. With the protein premium riding on a strong cash price, that one piece of ground grossed a little over $74,000. The note was 61,400 ton. Wayne Tolliver came out to the place on the 9th of September, 2022, a Friday afternoon, which is not when a man comes to make small talk. Dell heard the pickup on the gravel and came out and stood in the shop door, the same door he had stood in the day he loaded the first spreader of wool. 2 years before, Wayne got out with a folder under his arm, and he did not open with anything. He said, "I told you it was garbage with a pedigree." Dell said, "You did. I want to say the part I got right, then the part I got wrong, in that order." Wayne set the folder on the hood. "I was right about the chemistry. That wool did not release nitrogen on your schedule. It is still releasing. You'll be getting nitrogen off that ground in 2026, and I couldn't have told you how much in any given year. Neither can you." "I know it." "What I was wrong about," Wayne said, "is that I stood there arguing about a nitrogen curve, when the thing that saved you wasn't nitrogen at all. It was water. That fiber holds moisture, up in the top 4 inches where a seedling can find it. And in a year when nobody in this county had moisture, you had it. And I looked straight past it for 2 years, because I was busy being correct." He stood there a moment. About 90 of my accounts run sheep, he said, and most of them burned wool last fall. I'd like your numbers. Yields, rates, dates, what it cost you to spread. I'd like to take it to the extension office with your name on it, because they'll believe it more from a man in this county than from me. Dell said, "It was going to burn, Wayne." And Wayne Tolliver said, "I know. I heard you say it. I just didn't listen." That is the whole scene. Nobody raised his voice. June Acre was there. She had driven up from Belforche that morning with empty sacks for the spring clip. A 2-hour trip for an E20 errand that did not need making. And she stood by her own pickup through the whole conversation and said nothing at all. When Wayne pulled out, Dell walked over and stood next to her, and neither of them spoke for a while, the way people do when the important thing was already said on a telephone in April. 3 phone calls, he said. You only needed the one, she said. You just weren't ready for it until the 3rd. They were married the following June at the Lutheran Church in Buffalo, with the wheat already up. Now, here is the part that is real. What you have just heard is a dramatization. The people are composites. The dialogue is written. What is not written is the ground underneath it. The 2020 collapse in the American wool market was real, and coarse wool was hit hardest. There were producers whose clip would not cover the shearing crew that removed it, and wool was stockpiled and burned in real numbers. The 2022 nitrogen shock was real too. Fertilizer prices roughly tripled between 2020 and the spring of 2022, and cooperatives across the northern plains did ration product to their steadiest accounts. And the agronomy is real in both directions. Wool is keratin, and keratin carries a very high share of nitrogen by weight, which makes a bale of unsellable wool one of the most nitrogen-dense materials on a farm. Wayne Tolliver's objection is equally real, that nitrogen releases slowly and unevenly across several seasons, and no responsible agronomist would tell you to replace a fertilizer program with it. But raw wool also holds a large share of its own weight in water and gives it back slowly, and researchers in several countries have measured improved moisture retention and yield from waste wool on light, dry ground, which is the lesson, and it is not the one people usually take. Del Brubaker was not right about fertilizer. He was right about water, and he did not know it. The reason he was there to get lucky at all is that when every man in his county was paying to destroy a thing, he asked one question first. What is this actually made of? So let me leave you with this. Somewhere on your place, or in your line of work, there is something you are paying to get rid of. Not something worthless, something rejected. Those are 2 different words. What is it, and has anybody ever asked what it's made of? Tell me in the comments. I read them.